No rescue in sight. The baby was sinking fast. Then, through the storm and sludge, charged a golden blur with fire in its heart. The sky over rural Oregon was never silent in spring, but tonight it was more than thunder. It was wrath. A low rumble stirred the trees, the kind of sound that rolls deep through the woods like something alive. The wind whipped harshly against the branches, scattering leaves and snapping brittle twigs underfoot. Shadows danced in the streaks of lightning cutting across the horizon. The storm had arrived, brutal and unexpected, and with it came something else, something unexplainable. On the outskirts of town, past the last mailbox and the final flicker of porch light, sat a cabin nestled in a clearing, small, simple, and quiet, just the way Hank liked it. Hank Dawson, 62 years old, ex-military, widowed, and tired in the kind of way only a soldier-turned-farmer could be. He had grown to love the silence after years of chaos, but tonight the silence was broken. In the cabin's dim-lit living room, Hank sat reclined in his worn-out armchair, a book resting on his lap, unread. His eyes were heavy, not with sleep, but with thought. On the floor, resting like a golden guardian beside his feet, was Max, his loyal golden retriever, 10 years old, once a military K-9 trained for search and rescue. Max had been Hank's only companion since Marlene passed away 3 winters ago. Since then, the dog had aged, not just in years, but in spirit. His energy waned, his bones ached, and most days he moved slowly. But tonight, something was different. Max's ears perked up. He lifted his head slowly, alert. His eyes, once tired and clouded with age, suddenly sharpened. Hank noticed. "What is it, boy?" Hank asked, his voice gravelly. Max didn't respond. He stood, sniffed the air. Then he bolted to the door. "Max, hey, what the hell's gotten into you?" But Max wasn't listening. He barked once, loud and sharp, like a command echoing from his past life. And then, without waiting for permission, he pawed at the handle, something he hadn't done in years. Hank stumbled from his chair and opened the door. Max shot through it like lightning itself. The rain hit instantly, cold and stinging. The dog disappeared into the black. "Damn it, Max!" Hank shouted, grabbing a flashlight from the wall and pulling on his boots. But Max was gone. Meanwhile, miles away, deeper into the thick, swampy stretch of woods, the storm was a monster, howling between the trees. In the center of that wilderness, through puddles and muck and broken tree limbs, was a sight no one should ever have to see. A baby, alone, crying, barely more than a year old. He wasn't supposed to be there. His tiny arms reached out, trembling in the cold. His skin was smudged with dirt and streaked with tears. His clothes soaked through. The mud pulled at his legs with each movement, like it wanted to keep him. Every time he cried, the sound vanished into the storm, a lost voice in the roar of thunder. But someone was listening. Max ran with the kind of determination only instinct could summon. His legs cut through branches and waterlogged trails. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to go. There was no handler this time, no command, no reward, just a feeling that something small, something precious was in danger. He had trained for disasters, earthquakes, fires, floods. And somewhere deep in his memory, past all the years and aches, that training returned. He ran faster. Back at the cabin, Hank was on the phone with 911. "I know how it sounds, but Max isn't just a pet. He's trained. If he ran like that, it means someone's in trouble." "Sir, we understand. You say he has a GPS collar?" "Yeah. Last signal's heading northeast into state forest land. We'll dispatch a unit, but the weather's delaying response times. Please don't go in alone." "I'm not waiting. I know my dog." Hank hung up, grabbed his flashlight and a waterproof jacket. His heart was pounding, not just from the storm, but from fear. Max never broke protocol, ever, unless it was life or death. The baby cried louder now, his voice cracking, his energy fading. He had no idea where he was. Maybe he had wandered. Maybe someone left him. Maybe worse. But just as his sobs weakened, another sound broke through the storm. Pause. fast, heavy. Max leapt into view, his fur drenched, his eyes wide. He froze for just a moment, taking in the scene. Then, with a soft whimper, he trotted toward the baby. The infant looked up, confused but not scared. Max sniffed him gently, like checking for life, then barked a low, desperate call, but no one answered. So Max did what he was trained to do. He acted. Gently, Max moved behind the baby, positioning his nose under the child's arm. The mud was thick, but Max didn't care. He nudged, pulled, and braced himself. His paws sank deep, his body strained, but inch by inch. He moved the baby from the slick center of the path to firmer ground. The child cried at first, then slowly settled, his tiny hand resting on Max's fur. Max lay beside him, curling around the baby like a barrier from the cold. He licked the child's cheek gently, keeping him awake. The rain poured on, the thunder cracked. But now in that moment, the baby was no longer alone. Hours passed. Hank trudged through the trees, soaked to the bone, flashlight swinging. "Max! Max!" Every crack of thunder drowned his calls. His boots sank in mud with every step. Then he heard it, a bark, faint, but there. He turned, ran, another bark, closer. Then a flashlight beam caught movement, golden fur, maximum, and beside him, no, lying in his fur, was a child. "Oh my God," Hank whispered. He dropped to his knees. The baby was alive, cold, muddy, crying but breathing. Max looked up, eyes glassy but proud. "You, son of a..." Hank choked, blinking through the rain. "You really did it." He called emergency services again. Within minutes, rescue workers were on the way. Back at the scene while waiting for help, Hank took off his coat and wrapped it around the baby. He knelt beside Max, scratching behind his ears. "You're a damn hero, you know that?" Max closed his eyes for just a moment, tail thumping once against the grass. Then he lay his head beside the baby's hand. The storm still raged, but something had changed. In the middle of the woods, in the worst of the weather, a bond had formed. A silent promise between a dog and a child that no storm could break. The paramedics arrived in a blur of flashing red and white. Their floodlights cut through the storm, casting long shadows across the wet forest floor as they rushed toward Hank, Max, and the child. Hank stood over the baby like a human shield, his jacket still wrapped tightly around the tiny body, his expression unreadable. He didn't blink as the EMTs examined the infant, their voices hushed and quick. "He's alive," one of them confirmed, kneeling beside the baby with her gloved hands carefully inspecting his limbs. Cold, hypothermic, dehydrated, but alive. Hank exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. His legs gave out, and he dropped to the muddy ground beside Max, who hadn't moved from the child's side since Hank found them. Max looked up at his companion, chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. His eyes were tired but unwavering. "You held on, buddy," Hank whispered. "You held on." As the medics bundled the baby into a thermal blanket and carried him toward the waiting ambulance. Another EMT stayed behind to tend to Max. The dog tried to stand but faltered. "He's shaking," she said, kneeling beside the golden retriever. "Could be shock. His body temp's dropping fast." Hank removed his own shirt without hesitation and draped it over Max. "We ride with him," Hank said. It wasn't a suggestion. The medic hesitated. "Sir, this ambulance is for..." "He saved that baby's life. You want to tell me you're leaving him out here?" Her eyes met Hank's. Then she nodded. Inside the ambulance, the baby's tiny fingers clung to the edge of the blanket. A nasal cannula fed warm oxygen into his nose. Monitors beeped softly, but the infant's gaze never left Max, who lay on a padded mat just feet away. Max lifted his head weakly, then rested it back down. "He won't sleep," said the medic, watching the baby. "He keeps looking at your dog like he's family." Hank sat on the floor beside Max, his hand resting gently on the retriever's side. "Maybe he is now." The hospital in Eugene, Oregon was already on alert. News of a storm baby found in the middle of the woods by a rescue dog spread like wildfire. Doctors were waiting, police were waiting, reporters too. But no one had answers yet, not even the basics. No missing persons report, no alerts, No frantic parents rushing into the ER, demanding their baby back. Just an unnamed infant pulled from the mud and held alive by the instincts of a once-forgotten K9. While doctors worked on the baby, Hank stayed close to Max in a corner room of the animal care wing, now temporarily turned into a triage space for their unusual hero. A vet examined Max, checking his heart, limbs, and temperature. "He's exhausted," she said. "Dehydrated, minor muscle strain, slight hypothermia. But he'll make it." Hank let out a shaky laugh, brushing his hand over Max's fur. "He always does." The vet smiled gently. "He's got something that keeps him going." "Yeah," Hank muttered. "Duty." That night, as the storm finally relented and the skies began to clear, the town buzzed with the story. Police set up a full investigation. How did a baby end up alone in the forest during a violent storm? Was it an accident or something darker? The next morning, Sheriff Linda Monroe sat across from Hank in a quiet hospital waiting room. Her notebook was open, pen tapping against the page. "You're telling me the dog just ran out the door?" "Like something called to him," Hank said, sipping burnt coffee. "He hasn't done that in years. Hell, he hardly hears me anymore." "And you found them where again?" "East Trail, past Copper Bend. About 3 miles in." She jotted down the note. "That area's got swamp pockets. Real dangerous. If you hadn't found them?" Hank didn't answer. Sheriff Monroe leaned in. "No sign of a missing child in the entire county. No alerts. We've been scanning every record we have. Nothing matches." "You think he was abandoned?" Hank asked, his voice hard. "I'm not ruling it out." Hank's jaw clenched. "Someone left that baby to die. And your dog stopped it." Meanwhile, in the pediatric ICU, the baby was stable. Nurses rotated shifts to hold and feed him. He still hadn't made a sound beyond the occasional sleepy cry. But every time someone left the room, he looked toward the door, expecting Max. "Where's the dog?" the head nurse whispered. "He looks for him." 3 days later, Max was well enough to walk again. Hank brought him to the pediatric wing in a borrowed hospital gown and boots covered in duct tape. His eyes were bloodshot, his shoulders square. The nurse let them in. The baby, now cleaned and wrapped in a pale blue onesie, looked up from his crib. The moment Max entered the room, the child lit up. He reached. Max trotted forward and placed his head on the mattress. Tiny fingers gripped golden fur once more. Hank swallowed the lump in his throat. TV crews camped outside the hospital. "Oregon's miracle baby," they called him. "Mud Angel," some headlines read. "Saved by a dog." But behind the headlines, the mystery deepened. Where did the baby come from? Who left him? Why was he abandoned in one of the most dangerous parts of the forest in the middle of a storm? Sheriff Monroe pulled Hank aside that afternoon. "We need you and Max to come with us tomorrow," she said. "We're heading back to the site. Something's not adding up." "You think there's more?" Hank asked. "I think someone left him there. On purpose." That night, Hank stood beside Max in the moonlit cabin. He looked down at the dog, who now lay peacefully on the rug. "You always knew, didn't you?" he said. "You felt it. You heard him." Max wagged his tail once in response. "And now we're part of something way bigger than we asked for." Hank sat down beside him. "Let's go finish what we started." The forest wasn't the same in daylight. The mud had dried into cracked patches, the trees stood silent, and the storm's memory hung like a ghost in the wind. But Hank's boots still sank into the wet earth with every step as he walked the same path he and Max had taken just days ago. Max padded beside him, his gait slower than usual but determined, ears alert, nose twitching. Behind them, Sheriff Linda Monroe and 2 deputies trailed with forensic gear, cameras, and search kits. No one said much. The air was heavy with expectation. "Right up there," Hank said, pointing ahead. "That's where I found them. Baby was face up, crying. Max was half covered in mud." Sheriff Monroe nodded. "Let's mark it." A deputy dropped a bright orange flag beside a shallow puddle still ringed with small footprints. Too small to be Hank's. Too erratic to be a path walked willingly. The sheriff squatted near the site, scanning the area. "No tire tracks," she murmured. "Whoever dropped the baby off came on foot, maybe through the tree line." Hank looked toward the dense forest. "That direction leads to the old ranger station. It's been abandoned for years. Monroe's head turned sharply. How far? 2 miles, maybe. Used to be open in the 80s. Got closed after that fire. She stood. Let's check it. The walk to the ranger station was thick with overgrowth, brambles slicing at jeans and boots. Fallen branches crunched beneath their steps. Birds scattered overhead. Max stopped suddenly, his body tense. He sniffed the air, then darted off the trail. "Max!" Hank called out, but the dog didn't stop. They followed, crashing through brush until Max came to a halt near an old rusted shed, partially swallowed by vines. The sheriff stepped forward, pulling the door open with a screech of metal. Inside, a child's sock, tiny, mud-stained, fresh. Hank felt his stomach drop. "Someone was here recently," Monroe said. She turned to her deputy. "Bag it, carefully." Then something else caught Max's attention. He sniffed a corner of the shed and growled low. Hank moved closer. Scratched into the wooden wall, barely visible beneath mold and dirt, was a single word. "Help." Back at the hospital, the baby still had no name. No one had come forward to claim him. No family, no mother, no missing child matches, not even in other states. The nurses had started calling him Noah, a name that seemed fitting for a baby rescued during a flood. "Noah's eating more," the nurse told Hank over the phone. "Still cries if Max isn't near, though." "I'll bring him tomorrow," Hank replied. "We're not done yet." That night, Hank couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch of his cabin with Max curled beside him, the stars bright overhead. "I don't like this," he murmured. "A shed, a sock, a scratched up help?" Max lifted his head as if listening. "You think someone else was with him? Or maybe still is?" Max didn't move. Hank ran a hand down his face. "We're missing something." He went inside, pulled a dusty box from the closet, and laid out his old maps from his days as a fire ranger. And then he saw it, something that clicked into place. A footpath, rarely used, not marked on modern maps. It connected the old ranger station to an off-grid hunting cabin deeper in the hills, a place only someone local or desperate would know. The next morning, Hank marched into the sheriff's office with Max at his side and the map in hand. "We missed a connection," he said, spreading it out on her desk. "There's another cabin up here, was privately owned back in the 70s, probably still standing." Sheriff Monroe studied the map. "You think it's connected?" "I think whoever dropped that baby knew this place well enough to avoid being seen. I think there's more, maybe even another child." She stared at him for a long moment, then grabbed her gear. "Let's go." The hike to the hidden cabin was brutal. Mud, fallen trees, and narrow deer trails made every step a struggle. It took nearly an hour before the roof came into view, peeking through the pines like a forgotten ghost. Max stopped at the edge of the clearing and whined. "Something's off," Hank said. The sheriff signaled her deputies, then slowly approached the door. It was ajar. Gun drawn, she pushed it open. Inside, dust floated through the light beams. A cot, empty food cans, a baby bottle, torn children's clothing, a burnt photograph on the wall, half charred, but what remained showed a young woman holding a toddler, and then a noise, a soft thump from beneath the floorboards. Max growled. Sheriff Monroe yanked the rug aside, a trap door. She knelt, slowly pulling it open. Eyes widened. Inside, huddled in the dark, was a girl, no older than 6, dirt-covered, shaking, alive. They got her out, wrapped her in blankets, gave her water. She clung to Max like he was the only safe thing in the world. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Where's my baby brother?" The little girl clung to Max as if he were the last warm thing in the world. Her arms, thin and scratched, wrapped tightly around the retriever's neck, and Max didn't move. His body stilled under her touch, tail tucked close. He seemed to know, instinctively, that this child had seen more darkness than light. She wouldn't speak at first, wouldn't meet anyone's eyes, not even Hank's. But when her trembling hands brushed the side of Max's face, her lips finally parted. "Where's my baby brother?" Sheriff Monroe crouched low, her voice soft. "He's safe. At the hospital. Do you remember his name? The girl nodded slowly. Jacob. Can you tell us yours, sweetheart? The girl hesitated. Then, in a voice barely louder than the wind rustling the trees, she whispered, Ellie. They moved quickly after that. Sheriff Monroe radioed for a medical chopper. The hidden cabin, unreachable by vehicle, would have taken hours to navigate back on foot. Ellie was severely dehydrated. Her lips cracked, her bare feet bloodied from walking on rough floorboards. The medics arrived fast. Hank stayed by her side the entire time, Max never leaving her. She gripped Max's ear as they lifted her into the air. I don't want him to leave, she said weakly. He'll be right behind you, Hank promised, his hand on her small shoulder. He's your guardian now. As the blades roared overhead and the helicopter rose into the Oregon sky, Hank stood beneath the spinning gusts of wind with Max at his side. The girl had a name. The baby had a sister, but the mystery was only deepening. Back in the hospital, Ellie was reunited with her baby brother. She sat on a cot with Jacob in her lap, humming softly, the kind of lullaby that children teach each other in place of the ones no one sings anymore. Jacob reached up and touched her cheek. Max watched from the doorway. Hank leaned against the wall, arms folded, trying to make sense of what they had stumbled into. How long were they in that cabin? He asked aloud. Sheriff Monroe stood beside him, flipping through notes. Judging by the food, the debris, and the amount of clothing, I'd say weeks, maybe more. But how? Who left them there? Monroe looked toward the glass window where Ellie now cuddled her brother. We'll ask her, she said, but carefully. A child kept in a place like that, she may not even understand what's normal anymore. Hank's jaw clenched. There's something else too, the sheriff added. That photo on the wall? Still cries if Max isn't near, though. I'll bring him tomorrow, Hank replied. We're not done yet. That night, Hank couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch of his cabin with Max curled beside him, the stars bright overhead. I don't like this, he murmured. A shed, a sock, a scratched up help? Max lifted his head as if listening. You think someone else was with him? Or maybe still is? Max didn't move. Hank ran a hand down his face. We're missing something. He went inside, pulled a dusty box from the closet, and laid out his old maps from his days as a fire ranger. And then he saw it, something that clicked into place. A footpath, rarely used, not marked on modern maps. It connected the old ranger station to an off-grid hunting cabin deeper in the hills, a place only someone local or desperate would know. The next morning, Hank marched into the sheriff's office with Max at his side and the map in hand. We missed a connection, he said, spreading it out on her desk. There's another cabin up here, was privately owned back in the 70s, probably still standing. Sheriff Monroe studied the map. You think it's connected? I think whoever dropped that baby knew this place well enough to avoid being seen. I think there's more, maybe even another child. She stared at him for a long moment, then grabbed her gear. Let's go. The hike to the hidden cabin was brutal. Mud, fallen trees, and narrow deer trails made every step a struggle. It took nearly an hour before the roof came into view, peeking through the pines like a forgotten ghost. Max stopped at the edge of the clearing and whined. Something's off, Hank said. The sheriff signaled her deputies, then slowly approached the door. It was ajar. Gun drawn, she pushed it open. Inside, dust floated through the light beams. A cot, empty food cans, a baby bottle, torn children's clothing, a burnt photograph on the wall, half charred, but what remained showed a young woman holding a toddler, and then a noise, a soft thump from beneath the floorboards. Max growled. Sheriff Monroe yanked the rug aside, a trapdoor. She knelt, slowly pulling it open. Eyes widened. Inside, huddled in the dark, was a girl, no older than 6, dirt-covered, shaking, alive. They got her out, wrapped her in blankets, gave her water. She clung to Max like he was the only safe thing in the world. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. Where's my baby brother? The little girl clung to Max as if he were the last warm thing in the world. Her arms, thin and scratched, wrapped tightly around the retriever's neck, and Max didn't move. His body stilled under her touch, tail tucked close. He seemed to know, instinctively, that this child had seen more darkness than light. She wouldn't speak at first, wouldn't meet anyone's eyes, not even Hank's. But when her trembling hands brushed the side of Max's face, her lips finally parted. "Where's my baby brother?" Sheriff Monroe crouched low, her voice soft. "He's safe, at the hospital. Do you remember his name?" The girl nodded slowly. Jacob. "Can you tell us yours, sweetheart?" The girl hesitated. Then, in a voice barely louder than the wind rustling the trees, she whispered, "Ellie." They moved quickly after that. Sheriff Monroe radioed for a medical chopper. The hidden cabin, unreachable by vehicle, would have taken hours to navigate back on foot. Ellie was severely dehydrated. Her lips cracked, her bare feet bloodied from walking on rough floorboards. The medics arrived fast. Hank stayed by her side the entire time, Max never leaving her. She gripped Max's ear as they lifted her into the air. "I don't want him to leave," she said weakly. "He'll be right behind you," Hank promised, his hand on her small shoulder. "He's your guardian now." As the blades roared overhead and the helicopter rose into the Oregon sky, Hank stood beneath the spinning gusts of wind with Max at his side. The girl had a name. The baby had a sister, but the mystery was only deepening. Back in the hospital, Ellie was reunited with her baby brother. She sat on a cot with Jacob in her lap, humming softly, the kind of lullaby that children teach each other in place of the ones no one sings anymore. Jacob reached up and touched her cheek. Max watched from the doorway. Hank leaned against the wall, arms folded, trying to make sense of what they had stumbled into. "How long were they in that cabin?" he asked aloud. Sheriff Monroe stood beside him, flipping through notes. "Judging by the food, the debris, and the amount of clothing, I'd say weeks, maybe more." "But how? Who left them there?" Monroe looked toward the glass window where Ellie now cuddled her brother. "We'll ask her," she said, "but carefully. A child kept in a place like that, she may not even understand what's normal anymore." Hank's jaw clenched. "There's something else too," the sheriff added. "That photo on the wall? The one half burned? Yeah? We're running it through facial recognition, but Hank, we might already know who she is." The next morning, Ellie finally spoke. Not to Sheriff Monroe, not to the child psychologist, not even to the nurse. She spoke to Hank. He had brought Max with him, along with a small pack of peanut butter crackers, and sat cross-legged on the floor of her room like they were two campers beneath a blanket fort. Max laid down between them. "Is Max a police dog?" Ellie asked, her voice timid but curious. "He used to be," Hank said. "He's retired now, just lives with me out in the hills." "He found Jacob," she said, eyes brightening. "I heard him bark. I thought it was a bear at first." "You were very brave," Hank replied, "hiding down there like that." "I had to," she said, hugging Jacob close. "The man said he'd come back if I left. He said the wolves would eat us." Hank's stomach turned. "What man, Ellie?" She looked down. "He wasn't our daddy," she whispered. "Mommy said to run if he ever came back." Ellie's story came out in fragments. She and Jacob had been living with their mother, Emily, in a trailer on the edge of Roseburg. Quiet life, isolated. Their mother worked night shifts at a warehouse and homeschooled Ellie during the day. One night, a man came to their door. Ellie didn't know his name. She just remembered the shouting, the glass breaking, her mother's voice, crying, then silent. Then he was dragging Ellie and Jacob into a truck, driving for hours into the woods. He told her Emily was gone, told her no one would ever find them. Then he locked them in the hidden cabin. He fed them at first, brought bottles, diapers, crackers. But soon he came less and less. And then he didn't come back at all. That's when Ellie scratched help into the shed wall and tucked Jacob in the driest corner she could find, right before the rain came. She was going to go look for help the next morning. She didn't know the storm would hit that night. She didn't know Max would find them. Sheriff Monroe called it what it was, abduction and child endangerment. And she had a name now. thanks to a partial ID on the burnt photo in facial recognition tech. The man, Wayne Colburn, Emily's ex-boyfriend from 10 years ago. Violent record, 2 restraining orders. History of meth possession, disappeared off the grid 5 years ago. He had found them, again. But he hadn't finished whatever he started, because Max had interrupted it. Hank sat in the sheriff's office, the file folder heavy in his lap. They wouldn't have lasted another day, Monroe said. The storm would have killed them both. And now, Hank asked, do we have any clue where he is? We put out a BOLO, all counties, border states, airports. Nothing so far. Then he's watching, Hank said. He knows we found them. He's hiding. She didn't disagree. Over the next week, the hospital became a haven for Ellie and Jacob. They had beds, warm meals, toys, nurses who loved them, and Max, who never once left their side. Every morning, Ellie would curl up on his side, her head rising and falling with his breath like he was a living pillow. Jacob had learned to giggle, the kind of laughter only babies make when they feel safe for the first time in their lives. But even as warmth returned to their world, the shadow of Wayne Colburn lingered like smoke. He was still out there, and Ellie knew it. One night, Hank was walking Max outside the hospital when Ellie's nurse came rushing out. "Hank, you need to come quick. She had a nightmare." He rushed up to the room. Ellie was sitting up in bed, arms around Jacob, trembling. "The window!" she cried. "I saw him at the window." The nurse shook her head. "She's been dreaming. There's no one here. We checked the cameras. Nothing." But Hank didn't calm. He turned to Max. The dog stood rigid, nose in the air, tail flicking once. Then he growled. A deep, guttural growl Hank hadn't heard since Max was chasing criminals in his prime. "He's here," Hank whispered. "He's watching." Rain lashed against the hospital windows. The kind of hard, cold rain that silenced everything else. The wind howled like wolves, the sky stained gray. But inside room 214, all Hank could hear was Max's low growl, a sound that came from deep in his chest like thunder before a storm. Ellie clutched her baby brother, her eyes wide, fixed on the window. "I saw him," she whispered. "He was there, watching me." Nurse Carla stood frozen near the door, her chart forgotten in her hands. Hank crossed the room in 3 strides, peering through the blinds into the darkness beyond. Nothing. No shadow. No face. But Max was still growling. Sheriff Monroe burst in seconds later, radio in hand. "I heard the call. The cameras didn't show anything suspicious, but..." "He's close," Hank interrupted, his eyes still scanning the window. "Max smells something." The sheriff paused. "Then we move them. Tonight." By midnight, Ellie and Jacob were no longer in the hospital. The sheriff had arranged an emergency safe house just outside of town. Unlisted, unmarked, bulletproof windows, keypad locks. "Used to belong to a retired judge," Monroe said as they parked out front. "Quiet, safe. If Wayne Colburn even thinks about coming near, he'll trip 6 kinds of alarms." Hank carried Jacob inside while Ellie walked beside Max, holding his fur like a lifeline. "Will he find us here?" she asked softly. "No," Hank said. "Not if Max has anything to say about it." The days passed, but the tension didn't lift. Hank stayed at the house with them. So did Monroe, rotating shifts with 2 other deputies. The kids had beds, food, even a small fenced yard where Ellie could feel the sun. But every knock at the door made her flinch. Every creak of the floorboards brought memories. She still hadn't told them everything. Hank knew that much. "She's hiding something," he said to Monroe one night after the kids had gone to sleep. "I can see it in her eyes." Monroe nodded. "Could be trauma, could be survival instinct, or maybe something bigger." That night, Ellie woke screaming. It wasn't the window this time. It was the door. "I heard him," she cried. "He was inside. He said my name." Max tore through the hallway, barking with the fury of a storm. Hank chased him, flashlight in hand, sweeping every room, every shadow. But again, nothing. No forced entry, no broken glass, no footprints. But Max stayed on edge all night, pacing, barking at nothing, watching the trees. And that's when Hank started to wonder. Was Wayne already inside their circle? The next morning, Monroe brought a printed email. "You're not going to like this," she said. Hank read it. It was from a child services worker. Apparently, Ellie had once been reported as missing. Not just during the recent abduction, but years ago, when she was only 4. Her mother, Emily, had disappeared for 3 months, then suddenly reappeared with both kids, claiming she'd gone to escape a bad man and had returned for their sake. The report had been dismissed. No charges, no follow-up. And now that bad man had come back. "What else is she hiding?" Hank asked. Monroe didn't answer. That afternoon, while Jacob napped, Ellie sat on the porch with Max at her feet. Hank brought her a peanut butter sandwich and sat down beside her. "I had a daughter once," he said quietly. Ellie looked up. "She was your age, smart, brave, loved drawing horses. She got sick, cancer. We fought it, but some things you can't fix." Ellie didn't say anything, but her eyes softened. "She passed a long time ago," Hank said. "But sometimes when I talk to you, it feels like I'm looking at her again." Ellie's lip quivered. "I miss my mom," she whispered. "Even when she was scared, she tried to smile. She used to sing to Jacob every night, even if we only had crackers for dinner. She sounds like she loved you very much." Ellie nodded. "She told me a secret once," she said. "Said if anything ever happened to her, I had to keep Jacob safe, no matter what." She was right. She also said not to tell anyone where we came from, because he would find us. "Wayne," Ellie nodded slowly. "She said he used to be something else. Someone else." "What do you mean?" Ellie looked down. "He had another name, before he got hurt." That night, Hank dug deeper. He combed through every database, every archived police report, and eventually, he found it. Wayne Colburn wasn't Wayne Colburn. He was born Daniel Price, a decorated firefighter in Portland. 10 years ago, he'd been in a warehouse fire that left him badly injured and burned. Doctors said the trauma changed him, mentally. He was discharged, disappeared into the system. 3 years later, he reappeared, under a new name, with a record of violent outbursts, drug use, and stalking. Emily had known him before the fire. She had tried to escape the man he'd become. And now, he was hunting her children. Hank didn't sleep that night. Neither did Max. They both sat near the front door, watching the shadows crawl. Then, just past 3 a.m., Max stood up. His ears twitched. A low growl rolled from his throat, and then they heard it, a creak. From the back porch. Hank rose slowly, one hand on his flashlight, the other on his pistol. Max moved with him, silent as a ghost. They reached the back window, and there, standing just beyond the tree line, was a figure, tall, still, staring. Hank threw open the door and yelled, "What, stop!" "Sheriff's office." The figure turned and bolted. Max didn't wait. He charged into the dark, barking furiously. Hank followed, flashlight beam slicing through the woods. But by the time they reached the clearing, nothing. Just footprints, heavy, fresh, leading away. Max sniffed frantically, whining. "He was here," Hank muttered. "He's watching. He's testing us." The next morning, Monroe doubled the security. 2 armed deputies now guarded the house at all times. But Hank knew it wasn't enough. Wayne had already come too close, and Ellie was starting to change. She no longer played with Max. She sat in silence, waiting. Hank tried to talk, but she only said one thing. "He's going to take Jacob." "Not while I'm here," Hank promised. But Ellie just looked at him, her voice a whisper. "You don't know him like I do." That afternoon, Max found something buried beneath the back steps. Hank noticed him digging, fur bristling. He knelt down, pushed the dirt aside, and found a crumpled object wrapped in plastic. It was a photo, old, faded. It showed Emily, Ellie and Jacob's mother, with Daniel Price before the burns, before the madness, smiling, happy. On the back was a date and 4 words. "He always comes back." Inside the safe house, Hank looked at Ellie. "Did your mom give this to you?" Ellie's hands trembled. "She said if I ever saw that face again, the face before the fire, I had to run." "And if he found you?" Ellie looked toward Jacob's crib. "I had to protect him," Max barked once, short, urgent. From the window, Monroe called out, "Hank, you need to see this." He stepped outside. She handed him her phone. Live footage from the hospital's security camera. Footage from 3 days ago. Someone had walked past the nursery window. Briefly, just a silhouette. But even in the shadows, the burn scars were unmistakable. Wayne had already been watching. He had been planning. And Hank knew one thing. He would try again. And next time, he wouldn't just be watching. He'd be coming for Ellie and for Jacob. The story went viral overnight. By morning, every major news outlet had picked it up. Dog saves abandoned baby in Oregon storm. Photos of Max, mud-covered, golden fur, matted but eyes still sharp, circulated across the country. Local papers ran with the headline, "Oregon's four-legged hero," while national stations debated not just the miracle of survival, but the deeper question: what had drawn an aging, retired rescue dog back into action on a night when even humans had hesitated? Social media exploded. Within hours, hashtags trended globally. Hashtag Max the Hero, hashtag Golden Guardian, hashtag Miracle in the Woods. Letters poured into the hospital. Handwritten notes from children, drawings of Max with capes, scribbled messages like, "Thank you for saving the baby." Donations followed. Boxes of diapers, blankets, baby clothes, and toys, all addressed to baby Jacob and Max the dog. Oregon. People cried reading the story, not just because it was miraculous, but because it reminded them that in a world fractured by bad news, political division, and relentless tragedy, something as pure and powerful as a dog's instinct had saved a life. And in the middle of it all, Max didn't seem to understand the fuss. He simply lay quietly beside Ellie and Jacob, his body curled protectively around them, as if he had always belonged there. The baby, whose name was now confirmed as Jacob, was officially reunited with his mother 3 days after the rescue. Emily, pale and exhausted, walked into the hospital flanked by police officers and child services workers. Her story was heartbreaking, coerced into silence, living under threat, hiding from a man who once promised to love her and later tried to destroy her. She ran to her children with a sob that tore through the quiet hospital hallway. Jacob reached out to her. Ellie froze for a moment, then launched herself into her mother's arms. The room filled with quiet, shaking tears. Emily looked up from her children and locked eyes with Max. She knelt, trembling, and whispered, "Thank you." Her hands rested gently on his head as Max leaned forward, licking her fingers once, solemnly. "I thought I lost them," she said to Hank, "but he brought them back to me." News of the reunion only intensified the media storm. Interviews were requested by everyone, from local channels to national morning shows. Hank, never one for attention, declined most of them. He wasn't in it for headlines. Neither was Max, but one invitation was different. A call came directly from Washington, D.C. The Office of Public Engagement had seen the story and forwarded it to the Department of Homeland Security. From there, it reached the White House. An official request followed. Would Hank and Max attend a ceremony in the nation's capital? The reason: Max would be awarded the National Civilian Canine Medal of Valor, a rare and prestigious honor given only to animals who displayed extraordinary courage in the face of danger to save human lives. Hank didn't say yes immediately. He walked outside that evening and found Max lying beneath the old pine behind the cabin, the wind rustling the needles gently above them. "You ready to wear a medal, old man?" Hank asked, scratching the dog's ears. Max thumped his tail once in reply. The day of the ceremony was clear and cold. In Washington, D.C., under the marble pillars of the National Archives, a crowd had gathered. Press, families, veterans, and children held signs that read, "Thank you, Max," and "Oregon's Guardian Angel." Hank wore his best suit, one that hadn't seen sunlight since Marlene's funeral. It still fit, mostly. His military pin sat neatly on his chest. Max wore a fresh collar with a navy blue sash embroidered with gold. Courage, loyalty, honor. When the announcement came, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Max, our nation's canine hero." The crowd erupted into applause. Cameras flashed, children cheered. Max didn't flinch. He walked beside Hank with quiet dignity, pausing when they reached the front. The director of Homeland Security stepped forward, holding a small velvet box. "This dog," she began, her voice steady, "is not just a hero. He is a symbol of everything good that still lives quietly among us. In the darkest of storms, when no one else heard the cries of an innocent child, Max did." She turned, kneeling to place the medal around Max's neck. He stood tall. The medal caught the light, etched with a paw print encircled by the words, "For valor in service of humanity." Hank blinked rapidly, clearing his throat as the crowd rose for a standing ovation. He leaned down and whispered, "You earned this, buddy." Later, at a small reception, reporters swarmed Hank, asking what he thought made Max run into the woods that night. Hank took a sip of lukewarm coffee, glanced down at Max, who was now half asleep beside his feet, and said simply, "He heard what the rest of us didn't." A pause. He heard a life worth saving. Back in Oregon, the cabin wasn't so quiet anymore. The state offered Emily full legal protection and trauma support. Ellie began attending a local school, and after some persuasion, started horseback riding therapy. Her favorite thing to do, she claimed, besides hugging Max. Jacob was healthy, smiling more each day. He'd taken his first steps in the backyard, toward Max, of course, laughing as he grabbed fistfuls of golden fur. Hank had built a small swing between two trees, where Ellie often sat, legs dangling, as Max lay beneath her like a sentry. He also made a decision. He petitioned the state to adopt Max officially as an honorary member of the Oregon State Rescue Division. A ceremonial role, yes, but one that came with a lifetime of veterinary care, an engraved badge, and recognition from the governor. Max, of course, didn't care much for the titles. He was happy just lying in the sun, his job already done. But the world didn't forget. A bronze statue was commissioned the following spring, funded entirely by public donations. It now stands at the edge of the forest where the rescue took place. A life-size Max cast in mid-stride, head raised, tail curled, eyes searching. Beside the statue, a plaque reads, "In honor of Max, who answered the call no one else could hear." Beneath it, in smaller text, "Dedicated to all the silent heroes who listen when others turn away." Children leave flowers there, stuffed animals, crayons, and on rainy days, someone always leaves a yellow raincoat, child-sized, folded neatly at the base. Years passed. The world moved on, as it always does. But in small corners of the country, the story of Max still lingers. In classrooms, teachers use it to teach courage. In military bases, it reminds soldiers of the bond they share with their canine partners. And in homes, especially those where children once felt forgotten, it's a story of hope. Because sometimes in a world full of chaos, where the loudest voices drown out the most desperate cries, it's a dog who hears them. And sometimes that dog saves a life.